Hello. Oh, I didn't bring any snacks with me. I always enjoy some snacks. I really don't want to wait to read this because I've been thinking about it literally since we stopped reading yesterday. So yeah, I want to just go ahead and jump into reading. I hope y'all are doing well. And sorry if people are gonna join a little late, but I really just want to get down to it. So let's just get started. Chapter 47. Rowan hauled ass back to their ship, his magic near flinging him through the air. The other two ships had been left undisturbed. They'd even had the nerve to demand what the hell all the shouting was about. Rowan hadn't bothered to explain other than an enemy attack and to drop anchor until it was over before he'd left. He'd returned to Carnage, returned with his heart beating so wildly he thought he'd vomit with relief as he swept in for the landing and beheld Aelin kneeling on the deck, until he saw Fenris bleeding beneath her hands, until that last Ilkin landed before them. His rage honed itself into a lethal spear, his magic rallying as he dove through the sky, aiming for the deck. Concentrated bursts, he discovered, could get through whatever repellent had been bred into them. He'd ripped the thing's head right off. But then the Ilkin laughed right as Rowan landed and shifted, looking over its thin shoulder. Morath looks forward to welcoming you, the creature smirked, and launched skyward before Rowan could lunge for it. But Aelin wasn't moving. Gavriel and Adian, bloodied and limping, were barely moving. Fenris, his chest a bloody mess with greenish slime. Poison. Power glowed at Aelin's hands as she knelt over Fenris, concentrating on that bit of water she'd been given, a drop of water in a sea of fire. Rowan opened his mouth to offer to help when Lysandra panted from the shadows. "Is anyone going to deal with that thing, or should I?" Indeed, the Ilkin was flapping for the distant coast, barely more than a bit of blackness against the darkened sky, no doubt heading right to Morath to report. Rowan snatched up Fenris's fallen bow and quiver of black-tipped arrows. None of them stopped him as he strode to the railing, blood splashing beneath his boots. The only sounds were the tapping waves, the whimpering of the injured, and the groan of the mighty bow as he knocked an arrow and drew back the string, farther and farther. His arms strained, but he honed in on that dark speck flapping away. "A gold coin says he misses," Fenris rasped. "Save your breath for healing," Aelin snapped. "Make it 2, Adian said behind him. "I say he hits." "You can all go to hell," Aelin snarled, but then added, "Make it 5. 10 says he downs it with the first shot." "Deal," Fenris groaned, his voice thick with pain. Rowan gritted his teeth. "Remind me why I bother with any of you." Then he fired. The arrow was nearly invisible as it sailed through the night, and with his phase sight, Rowan saw with perfect clarity as that arrow found its mark. Right through the thing's head. Aelin laughed quietly as it hit the water, its splash visible even from the distance. Rowan turned and scowled down at her. Light shimmered at her fingertips as she held them over Fenris's ravaged chest. But he returned his glare on that male, then on Adian, and said, "Pay up, pricks." Adian chuckled, but Rowan caught the shadow in Aelin's eyes as she resumed healing his former sentinel, understood why she'd made light of it, even with Fenris injured before her. Because if Erowyn now knew their whereabouts, they had to move, fast, and pray Rolf's directions to the lock weren't wrong. Damn. Adian was sick of surprises, sick of feeling his heart stop dead in his chest, as it had when Gavriel had leapt to save his ass with the Ilkin, the lion tearing into them with a ferocity that had left Adian standing there like a novice with his first practice sword. The stupid bastard had injured himself in the process, earning a swipe down his arm and ribs that set the male roaring in pain. The venom coating those claws, mercifully, had been used up on other men, but it was the tang of his father's blood that launched Adian into action, that coppery, mortal scent. Gavriel had only blinked at him, as Adian had ignored the throbbing pain in his leg, courtesy of a blow moments before right above his knee, and they'd fought back to back, until those creatures were nothing but twitching heaps of bone and flesh. He hadn't said a word to the male before sheathing sword and shield across his back and stalking to find Aelin. She still knelt over Fenris. offering Rowan nothing more than a pat on his thigh as he stormed past to help with the other wounded. A pat on the thigh for making a shot that Adian was fairly certain most of his bane would have judged to be impossible. Adian set down the pail of water she'd asked him to get for Fenris, trying not to wince as she wiped away the green poison that oozed out. A few feet away, his father was tending to a blubbering pirate who had barely more than a tear to the thigh. Fenris hissed, and Aelin let out a grunt of pain herself. Adian pushed in. What? Aelin shook her head once, a sharp dismissal, but he watched as she locked eyes with Fenris, locked and held them in a way that told Adian whatever she was about to do would hurt. He'd seen that same look pass between healer and a soldier 100 times on killing fields, and in the healer's tent afterward. Why? Fenris panted. Didn't. Another pant. You just melt them. Because I wanted to get some information out of them before you charged in, you bossy fey bastard. She gritted her teeth again, and Adian braced a hand on her back as the poison no doubt brushed against her magic. As she tried to wash it out, she leaned a bit into his touch. I can heal on my own, Fenris rasped, noting the strain. Get to the others. Oh, please, she snapped. You're all insufferable. That thing had poison on its claws. The others. Tell me how your magic works. How you can leap between places like that. A clever, easy way to keep him focused elsewhere. Adian scanned the deck, making sure he wasn't needed, and then carefully sopped up the blood and poison leaking from Fenris's chest. It had to hurt like hell. The insistent throbbing in his leg was likely nothing by comparison. No one knows where it comes from, what it is, Fenris said between shallow breaths, fingers curling and uncurling at his sides. But it lets me slip between folds in the world. Only short distances, and only a few times before I'm drained, but it's useful on a killing field. He panted through his clenched teeth as the outer edges of his gash began to reach for each other. Aside from that, I've got nothing special. Speed, strength, swift healing, more than the average fae, but the same stock of gifts. I can shield myself and others, but can't summon an element. Aelin's hand wavered slightly over his wound. What's your shield made of, then? Fenris tried and failed to shrug, but Gavriel muttered from where he worked on the still whimpering pirate. Arrogance. Aelin snorted, but didn't dare take her eyes off Fenris's injury as she said, So you do have a sense of humor, Gavriel? The lion of Doranel gave a wary smile over his shoulder, the rare-sided, restrained twin to Adian's own flashing grins. Aelin had called him Uncle Kitty Cat, all of one time before Adian had snarled viciously enough to make her think carefully before using the term again. Gavriel, to his credit, had merely given Aelin a long, suffering sigh that seemed to be used only when she or Fenris were around. That sense of humor only appears about once every century, Fenris rasped, so you'd better hope you settle. Or else that's the last time you'll see it. Aelin chuckled, though it faded quickly. Something cold and oily slid into Adian's gut. Sorry, Fenris added, wincing either at the wounds or at the words or the pain. Aelin asked before Adian let his words sink in. Where did you come from? Lorcan, I know, was a bastard in the slums. Lorcan was a bastard in Maeve's palace, don't worry. Fenris smirked, his brawn face wan. Aelin's lips twitched toward a smile. Connell and I were the sons of nobles who dwell in the southeastern part of Maeve's lands, he hissed. Your parents? Adian pressed when Aelin herself seemed to be straining for words. He'd seen her heal little cuts and slowly repair Manon's wound over days, but our mother was a warrior, Fenris said, each word labored. She trained us as such. Our father was too, but was often away at war. She was tasked with defending our home, our lands, and reporting to Maeve. Rasping, laboring breath from both of them. Adian shifted so that Aelin could lean wholly against him, biting down on the weight it put on his already swollen knee. When Con and I were 30, we were straining at the leash to go to Doranel with her, to see the city, meet the Queen, and do what young males like to do with money in their pockets and youth on their side. Only Maeve took one look at us, and he needed longer to catch his breath this time. It didn't go well from there. Adian knew the rest, so did Aelin. The last of the green slime slid out of Fenris's chest, and Aelin breathed. She knows you hate the oath, doesn't she? Maeve knows, Fenris said, and I have no doubt she sent me here hoping I'd be tortured by the temporary freedom. Aelin's hands were shaking, her body shuddering against his own. Adian slipped an arm around her waist. I'm sorry you're bound to her, was all Aelin managed. The wounds in Fenris's chest began knitting together, Rowan stalked over as if sensing she was fading. Fenris's face was still grayish, still taut, as he glanced up at Rowan and said to Aelin, "This is what we were meant to do. Protect, serve, cherish. What Maeve offers is a mockery of that." He surveyed the wound, now healing on his chest, mending so slowly. "But it is what calls to a Fae male's blood, what guides him, what we're all looking for, even when we say we're not." Aedian's father had gone still over the wounded pirate. Aedian, surprising even himself, said over his shoulder to Gavriel, "And do you find Maeve fulfills that? Or are you like Fenris?" His father blinked, about all the shock he'd show, and then straightened, the wounded sailor before him now sleeping off the healing. Aedian bore the brunt of his tawny stare, tried to shut out the kernel of hope that shone in the lion's eyes. "I come from a noble house as well, the youngest of 3 brothers. I wouldn't inherit or rule, so I took to soldiering. It earned Maeve's eye, and her offer. Is no greater honor." "Be for real now." "That's not an answer," Aedian said quietly. His father rolled his shoulders, fidgeting. "I only hated it once. Only wanted to leave once." He didn't continue, and Aedian knew what the unspoken words were. Aelin brushed a strand of hair out of her face. "You loved her that much?" Aedian tried not to let his gratitude that she'd asked for him show. Gavriel's hands were white-knuckled as they folded into fists. "She was a bright star in centuries of darkness. I would have followed that star to the ends of the earth if she had let me. But she didn't, and I respected her wishes to stay away, to never seek her out again. I went to another continent and didn't let myself look back." Aww. Bro! Gavriel! The ship's creaking and the groaning of the injured were the only sounds. Aedian clamped down on the urge to stand and walk away. He'd look like a child, not a general who'd fought his way through knee-deep gore on killing fields. Aelin said, again because Aedian couldn't bring himself to say the words, "You would have tried to break the blood oath from her? For her? For them?" "Honor is my code," Gavriel said. "But if Maeve had tried to harm either you or her, Aedian, I would have done everything in my power to get you out." Stop! I'm gonna cry! The words hit Aedian, then flowed through him. He didn't let himself think about it. The truth he'd felt in each word. The way his name had sounded on his father's lips. His father checked the injured pirate for any lingering injuries, then moved on to another. Those tawny eyes slid to Aedian's knee, swollen beneath his pants. "You need to tend to that, or it'll be too stiff to function in a few hours." Aedian felt Aelin's attention snap to him, scanning him for injury, but he held his father's gaze and said, "I know how to treat my own injuries. The battlefield healers in the Bane had taught him enough over the years. Tend to your own wounds." Indeed, the male had blood crusting his shirt. Lucky, so lucky the venom had already been wiped off those claws. Gavriel blinked down at himself, his band of tattoos bobbing as he swallowed, then continued without another word. Aelin pushed off Aedian at last, trying and failing to get to her feet. Aedian reached for her as the focus went out of her now dull eyes, but Rowan was already there, smoothly sweeping her up before she kissed the planks. Too fast. She must have drained her reserves too fast, and without any food in her system. Rowan held his stare, Aelin's hair limp as she rested her head against his chest. The strain, Aedian's guts twisted at it. Morath knew what it was going up against, who it was going up against. Erwin had built his commanders accordingly. Rowan nodded as if in confirmation of Aedian's thoughts, but only said, "Elevate that knee." Fenris had slipped into a light sleep before Rowan carried Aelin below, so Aedian kept his own company for the rest of the night. First on watch, then sitting against the mast on the quarterdeck for a few hours, knee indeed elevated, unwilling to descend into the cramped, dim interior. Sleep was finally starting to tug at him when Wood groaned a few feet behind, and he knew it did only so because she willed it, to keep from startling him. The ghost leopard sat beside him, tail twitching, and met his eyes for a moment before she laid her enormous head on his thigh. In silence, they watched the stars flicker over the calm waves, Lysandra nuzzling her head against his hip. The starlight stained her coat with muted silver, and a smile ghosted Adian's lips. Stop! I love them. I know everyone can't get a fucking happy ending, but Jesus. I keep, like, ranking the importance of people surviving in my mind. And I feel like with every chapter that I read, it's always getting shifted. Like, because I have two lists. I have, like, single characters that I don't want to die. And then I have, like, couples that I don't want to die. Or, like, for anything to happen to them. And it's like, with each chapter that I read, they just keep reorganizing. And I know it's not going to end well for me, but like, god damn. Chapter 48. They worked through the night, weighing anchor only long enough for the crew to patch up the hole in Manon's room. It would hold for now, the captain told Dorian, but gods help them if they hit another storm before they got to the marshes. They tended to the wounded for hours, and Dorian was grateful for the little healing magic Rowan had taught him as he pieced flesh back together. Pretending it was a puzzle, or bits of torn cloth, kept his meager dinner from coming back up. But the poison, he left that to Rowan, Aelin, and Gavriel. By the time the morning had shifted into a sickly gray, their faces were sallow, dark smudges etched deep beneath their eyes. Fenris, at least, was limping around, and Adian had let Aelin tend to his knee only long enough to get him walking again, but they'd seen better days. Dorian's legs were wobbling a bit as he scanned the blood-soaked deck. Someone had dumped the creatures' bodies overboard, along with the worst of the gore, but if what the bloodhound had said was true, they didn't have the luxury of pulling into a harbor to fix the rest of the damage to the ship. A low, rumbling growl sounded, and Dorian looked across the deck, to the prow. The witch was still there, still tending to Abraxas's wounds, as she had been all night. One of the creatures had bit him a few times, thankfully no poison in their teeth, but he'd lost some blood. Manon had not let anyone near him. Aelin had tried once, and when Manon snarled at her, Aelin had cursed enough to make everyone else halt, saying she'd ready deserve it if the beast died. Oh. Damn! Manon had threatened to rip out her spine. Aelin had given her a vulgar gesture, and Lysandra had been forced to monitor the space between them for an hour, perched in the rigging of the mainmast in ghost leopard form, tail swaying in the breeze. But now, Manon's white hair was limp, the warm morning wind tugging lazily at the strands as she leaned against Abraxas's side. Dorian knew she was towing a dangerous line, or he was towing a dangerous line. The other night, he'd been ready to slow... Okay. As if sensing his stare, Manon peered over at him. Even from across the deck, every inch between them went taut. Of course, Adian and Fenris instantly noted it, pausing where they now washed blood off the deck, and the latter snorted. Both had healed enough to walk, but neither moved to interfere as Manon prowled toward him. If she hadn't fled or attacked yet, they must have decided she wasn't going to bother doing so now. Manon took up a space at the rail, gazing out at the endless water, the wisps of pink clouds smeared along the horizon, dark blood stained at her shirt, her palms. Do I have you to thank for this freedom? He braced his forearms on the wooden rail. Maybe. Gold eyes slid to him. The magic. What is it? I don't know, Dorian said, studying his hands. It felt like an extension of me, like real hands I could command. For a heartbeat, he thought of how they'd felt. Okay. Her golden eyes flared as if recalling it as well, and Dorian found himself saying, I wouldn't harm you. You liked killing the bloodhound, though. He didn't bother keeping the ice from his eyes. Yes. Manon stepped close enough to brush a finger over the pale band around his throat, and he forgot that there was still a ship full of people watching. You could have made her suffer. You went for a clean blow instead. Why? Because even with our enemies, there's a line. Then you have your answer. I didn't ask a question. Manon snorted. You've had that look in your eyes all night. If you're becoming a monster like the rest of us, the next time you kill, remind yourself of that line. Where do you stand on that line, witchling? She met his gaze. as if willing him to see a century of all that she'd done. I'm not mortal. I don't play by your rules. I've killed and hunted men for sport. Don't mistake me for a human woman, princeling. I have no interest in human women, he purred. Too breakable. Oh. Damn. Even as he said it, the word struck some deep, aching wound in him. I was about to say, that was a little... The Ilkin, he said, pushing past that pain. Did you know about them? I assume they're part of whatever is in those mountains. A hoarse female voice snapped. What do you mean, whatever's in those mountains? Dorian nearly leapt out of his skin. Aelin, it seemed, had been taking some notes from her ghost leopard friend. Even Manon blinked at the blood-drenched queen now behind them. Manon eyed Adian and Fenris as they heard Aelin's demand and came over, followed by Gavriel. Fenris's shirt was still hanging in strips. At least Rowan was now keeping watch from the rigging, and Lysandra was off flying overhead, scouting for danger. The witch said, I never saw the Ilkin, only heard of them. Heard their screaming as they died, then their roaring as they were remade. I didn't know that's what they were, or that Erwin would send them so far from their eyrie. My shadows caught a glimpse of them, just once. Their description matches what attacked last night. Are the Ilkin mostly scouts or warriors? Aelin said. The fresh air seemed to have made Manon amenable to divulging information because she leaned her back against the railing, facing the cabal of killers around them. We don't know. They use the cloud cover to their advantage. My shadows can find anything that doesn't want to be found, and yet they could not hunt or track these things. Aelin tensed a bit, scowling at the water flowing past them. And then she said nothing, as if the words had vanished in exhaustion. Something heavier than that had set in. Snap out of it, Manon said. Adian loosed a warning growl. Aelin slowly lifted her eyes to the witch, and Dorian braced himself. So you miscalculated, Manon said. So they tracked you. Don't get distracted with the minor defeats. This is war. Cities will be lost, people slaughtered. And if I were you, I would be more concerned about why they sent so few of the Ilkin. If you were me, Aelin murmured in a tone that had Dorian's magic rising, ice cooling at his fingertips. Adian's hand slid to his sword. If you were me. A low, bitter laugh. Dorian had not heard that sound since a blood-soaked bedroom in a glass castle that no longer existed. Well, you are not me, Blackbeak, so I'll trust you to keep your musings on the matter to yourself. I'm not a Blackbeak, Manon said. They all stared at her, but the witch merely watched the queen. Aelin said, with a wave of her scar-flecked hand, Right. That matter of business. Let's hear the story, then. Dorian wondered if they would come to blows, but Manon simply waited a few heartbeats, looked toward the horizon again, and said, When my grandmother stripped me of my title as heir and wing leader, she also stripped my heritage, She told me that my father was a Crochan prince, and she had killed my mother and him for conspiring to end the feud between our peoples and break the curse on our lands. Dorian glanced to Adian. The Wolf of the North's face was taut, his Ash River eyes shining bright, churning at the possibilities of all that Manon implied. Manon said a bit numbly, as if it was the first time she'd even spoken it to herself. I'm the last Crochan queen, the last direct descendant of Rhiannon Crochan herself. Whatever. Aelin only sucked on a tooth, brows lifting. And, Manon said, whether my grandmother acknowledges it or not, I am heir to the Blackbeak clan. My witches, who have fought at my side for 100 years, have spent most of it killing Crochans, dreaming of a homeland that I promised to return them to. And now I am banished, my 13 scattered and lost, and now I am heir to our enemy's crown. You are not the only one, Majesty, who has plans that go awry. So get yourself together and figure out what to do next. 2 queens. There were 2 queens among them, Dorian realized. Aelin closed her eyes and let out a rough, breathy laugh. Adian again tensed as if that laugh might easily end in violence or peace, but Manon stood there, weathering the storm. When Aelin opened her eyes, her smile subdued but edged, she said to the Witch Queen, I knew I saved your sorry ass for a reason. Manon's answering smile was terrifying. The males all seemed to loosen a tight breath, Dorian himself included, but then Fenris pulled at his lower lip, scanning the skies. What I don't get is why wait so long to do any of this. If Arian wants you lot dead, a nod toward Dorian and Aelin, why let you mature, grow powerful? Dorian tried not to shudder at the thought, how unprepared they'd been. Because I escaped Erwin, Aelin said. Dorian tried not to remember that night 10 years ago, but the memory of it snapped through him, and her, and Adian. He thought I was dead, and Dorian, his father, shielded him, as best he could. Dorian shut out that memory too, especially as Manon angled her head in question. Fenris said, Maeve knew you were alive. Odds are so did Erwin. Maybe she told Erwin, Adian said. Fenris whipped his head to the general. She's never had any contact with Erwin, or Ardalan. As far as you know, Adian mused. Unless she's a talker in the bedroom. Oh, okay. He was out of pocket for that one. Fenris's eyes darkened. Maeve does not share power. She saw Ardalan as an inconvenience. Still does. Adian countered. Everyone can be bought for a price. Nameless is the price of Maeve's allegiance, Fenris snapped. It can't be purchased. Aelin went utterly still at the warrior's words. She blinked at him, her brows narrowing as her lips silently mouthed the words he'd said. What is it? Adian demanded. Aelin murmured. Nameless is my price. Adian opened his mouth, no doubt to ask what had snagged her interest, but Aelin frowned at Manon. Can your kind see the future? See it as an oracle can. Some, Manon admitted. The Blue Bloods claim to. Can other clans? They say that for the ancients, past and present and future bleed together. Aelin shook her head and walked toward the door that led to the half of the cramped cabins. Rowan swooped off the rigging. Why can't I read today? And shifted his feet, hitting the planks just as he finished. He didn't so much as look at them as he followed her into the hall and shut the door behind them. What was that about? Fenris asked. An ancient, Dorian mused, then murmured to Manon, Baba Yellowlegs. They all turned to him, but Manon's fingers brushed against her collarbone, where the necklace of Aelin's scars from Yellowlegs still ringed around her neck in stark white. This winter, she was at your castle, Manon said, working as a fortune-teller. And what? She said something to that degree? Adian crossed his arms. He'd known of the visit, Dorian recalled. Adian had always kept an eye on the witches, on all the power players of the realm, he'd once said. Manon stared the general down. Yellowlegs was a fortune-teller, a powerful oracle. I bet she knew who the queen was the moment she saw her, and saw things she planned to sell to the highest bidder. Dorian tried not to flinch at the memory. Aelin had butchered Yellowlegs when she threatened to sell his secrets. Aelin had never implied a threat against her own. Manon continued. Yellowlegs wouldn't have told the queen anything outright, only in veiled terms, so it'd drive the girl mad when she figured it out. A pointed glance at the door through which Aelin had vanished. None of them said anything else, even as they later ate cold porridge for breakfast. The cook, it seemed, hadn't made it through the night. Damn. I don't get it. Nameless is my price? Where did we hear that? I really have not been paying attention to the prophecies this time around, y'all. I really haven't, because I don't remember anyone saying that. Rowan knocked on the door of their private bathing room. She locked it, walked into their room, then into the bathing room, and locked him out. Nameless? Nameless is my price? Is Nameless a person? Is Nameless a person? Now I'm trying to think. And now she was puking her guts up. Why is she puking? Who's Nameless? Aelin, he growled softly. A ragged intake of breath, then retching, then more vomiting. Aelin, he snarled, debating how long until it was socially acceptable for him to break down the door. Act like a prince, she'd snarled at him the other night. I don't feel well, was her muffled response. Her voice was hollow, flat in a way he hadn't heard for some time now. Then let me in. This dude! Then let me in so I can take care of you, he said as calmly and rationally as he could. She'd locked him out. Locked him out. I don't want you to see me like this. I've seen you wet yourself. I can handle vomiting, which I have also seen you do before. 10 seconds. 10 more seconds seemed like a fair enough amount of time before he crunched down on the handle and splintered the lock. Just give me a minute. What was it about Fenris's words that set you off? He'd heard it all from his post on the mast. Utter silence. Like she was spooling the raw terror back into herself, shoving it down into a place where she wouldn't look at it or feel it or acknowledge it or tell him about it. Aylin. The lock turned. Her face was gray, her eyes red-rimmed. Her voice broke as she said, I want to talk to Lysandra. Rowan looked at the bucket she'd half filled, then at her bloodless lips, at the sweat beaded on her brow. His heart stopped dead in his chest as he contemplated that she might not be lying. And why she might be ill. Oh, is she pregnant? I didn't even think about that. He tried to send her, but the vomit was too overpowering, the space too small and full of brine. Oh, nameless, as in her baby? Wait, what? No. No. Wait, what? He stumbled back a step, shutting out the thoughts. Without another word, he left their room. He was numb as he hunted down the shifter, now returned in inhuman form as she devoured a cold, soggy breakfast. With a concerned look, Lysandra silently did as he commanded. Rowan shifted and soared so high that the ship turned into a bobbing speck below. Clouds cooled his feathers. The wind roared over the pure panic thundering in his heart. He planned to lose himself in the awakening sky while scouting for danger, to sort himself out before he returned to her and started asking questions that he might not be ready to hear the answers to. This is a little dramatic. He doesn't even know if it's true. But the coast appeared, and only his magic kept him from tumbling out of the sky at what the first rays of the sun revealed. Broad, sparkling rivers and snaking streams flowed throughout the undulating emerald and gold of the grasslands and reeds lining them, the burnt gold of the sandbanks flanking either side, and where the little fishing villages had once watched over the sea. Fire. Dozens of those villages burned. On the ship beneath him, the sailors began to shout, calling to one another as the coast at last broke over the horizon, and the smoke became visible. Ilwi was burning. We just can't catch a motherfucking break! We can't catch a goddamn break! Oh my god. Chapter 49. A lead. A lead. This is my break. These chapters with a lead and Lorcan, they are my break. They are my break. Elide didn't speak to Lorcan for 3 days. She wouldn't have spoken to him for another 3, maybe for 3 damn months, if necessity hadn't required them to break their hateful silence. Her cycle had come, and through whatever steady, healthy diet she'd been consuming this past month, it had gone from an inconsistent trickle to the deluge she'd awoken to this morning. She'd hurtled from the narrow bed in the cabin to the small privy on board, rifled through every drawer and box she could find, but clearly a woman had never spent any time on this infernal boat. She resorted to ripping up the embroidered tablecloth for liners, and by the time she'd cleaned herself up, Lorcan was awake and already steering the boat. She said flatly to him, I need supplies. You still reek of blood. I suspect I will reek of blood for several more days, and it will get worse before it gets better, so I need supplies. Now. He turned from his usual spot near the prow, sniffing once. Her face was burning, her stomach a knotted mess of cramping. I'll stop at the next town. When will that be? The map was of no use to her. By nightfall. Is he gonna... Is he gonna take care of her while she's cramping? Y'all. Y'all! Y'all! They'd sailed right through every town or outpost along the river, surviving on the fish Lorcan had caught. She'd been so annoyed at her own helplessness that after the first day she'd started copying his movements and had earned herself a fat trout in the process. She'd made him kill it and gut it and cook it, but she'd at least caught the thing. Elide said, fine. Lorcan said, fine. She aimed for the cabin to find some other fabrics to tide her over, but Lorcan said, you barely bled the last time. The last thing she wanted to do was have this conversation. Perhaps my body finally felt safe enough to be normal. Because even with him murdering that man, lying, and then spitting the truth about Aelin in her face, Lorcan would go up against any threat without a second thought. Perhaps for his own survival, but he promised her protection. She was able to sleep through the night because he lay on the floor between her and the door. Oh my god. Y'all, I have my tabs today because I have my backpack. Oh my god. I'm getting them out just in case. I'm not gonna tab what I just read because, like, I already know. But I'm still gonna get them out just in case. And you know what? I'm getting my backup tabs out and I'm leaving one in my motherfucking middle console right now. But I'm getting my other tabs out. She was able to sleep through the night because he lay on the floor between her and the door. So there's nothing wrong then? He didn't bother to look at her as he said it, but she cocked her head, studying the hard muscles of his back. Even while refusing to speak to him, she'd watched him and made excuses to watch as he went through his exercises each day, usually shirtless. No, there's nothing wrong, she said. At least she hoped. But Finula, her nursemaid, had always clicked her tongue and said her cycles were spotty, too light and irregular. For this one to have come precisely a month later, she didn't feel like wondering about it. They're so cute! I can't! Lorcan said, good. It'd delay us if it were otherwise. Okay, yeah, that's why. That's why he's worried. She rolled her eyes at his back, not at all surprised by the answer, and limped into the cabin. He'd needed to stop anyway, Lorcan told himself as he watched Elide barter with an innkeeper in town for the supplies she needed. She'd wrapped her dark hair in a discarded red handkerchief. She must have scrounged up on that pitiful little barge, and even used a nasally accent while she spoke to the woman, her entire countenance a far cry from the graceful, quiet woman he'd spent 3 days ignoring, which had been fine. He'd used these 3 days to sort out his plans for Aelin Galathinius, how he'd return the favor she dealt him. The inn seemed safe enough, so Lorcan left Elide to her bartering. Turned out she wanted new clothes, too, and wandered the ramshackle streets of the backwater town in search of supplies. The streets were abuzz with river traders and fisher folk mooring for the night. Lorcan managed to intimidate his way into buying a crate of apples, dried venison, and some oats for half their usual price. Just to get him away, the merchant along the crumbling quay threw in a few pears. For the lovely lady, he'd said. Lorcan, arms full of his wares, was almost to the barge when the words echoed in his head, an off-kilter pealing. Uh-oh. 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 Bessies! What happened? He hadn't taken a lead past that section of the quay, hadn't spied the man while he'd been talking, or when they'd left. Rumor could account for it, but this was a river town. Strangers were always coming and going and paid for their anonymity. Yeah. He hurried back to the barge. Fog had rippled in from the river, clouding the town and the opposite bank. By the time he dumped the crate and wares onto the boat, not even bothering to tie them down, the streets had emptied. His magic stirred. He scanned the fog, the splotches of gold where candles shone in the windows. Not right, not right, not right, his magic whispered. Where was she? Hurry, he willed her, counting the blocks they'd taken to the inn. She should have been back by now. The fog pressed in. Squeaking sounded at his boots. Lorcan snarled at the cobblestones as rats streamed past, toward the water. They flung themselves into the river, crawling and clawing over one another. Something wasn't coming. Something was here. What do you mean, here we go? This is supposed to be my break. What do you mean, here we go? The innkeeper insisted she try on the clothes before she bought them. She bundled them in Alid's arms and pointed her toward a room in the back of the inn. Men stared at her, too eagerly, as she passed and strode down a narrow hall. Typical of Lorcan to leave her while he sought whatever he needed. Alid shoved into the room, finding it black and chilled. She twisted, scanning for a candle and flint. The door snapped shut, sealing her in. Alid lunged for the handle as that little voice whispered, "Run, run, 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 run." She slammed into something muscled, bony, and leathery. It reeked of spoiled meat and old blood. A candle sparked to life across the room, revealing a wooden table, an empty hearth, sealed windows, and... Who? Vernon! Sitting on the other side of the table, smiling at her like a cat. Strong hands tipped in claws clamped on her shoulders, nails cutting through her leathers. The Elkin held her firmly as her uncle drawled. "What an adventure you've had, Alid." Oh my god. Chapter 50. I can't wait for Lorcan to come in here and tear everybody up. He's gonna tear their asses apart. "How did you find me?" Alid breathed, the reek of the Elkin nearly enough to make her vomit. Her uncle rose to his feet in a fluid, unhurried movement, straightening his green tunic. "Asking questions to buy yourself time? Clever, but expected." He jerked his chin to the creature. It loosed a low, guttural clicking sound. The door opened behind it, revealing two other Ilkin now crowding the hall with their wings and hideous faces. Oh gods. Oh gods. Think. "Your companion, last we heard, was putting supplies on his boat and unmooring it. You probably should have paid him more." "He's my husband," she hissed. "You have no right to take me from him. None." Because once she was married, Vernon's wardenship over her life ended. Vernon let out a low laugh. "Lorcan Salvaterre, Maeve's second in command, is your husband?" "Really, Alid?" He waved a lazy hand to the Ilkin. "We depart now. Fight now. Now, before they had the chance to move her, to get her away." But where to run? The innkeeper had sold her out. Someone had betrayed their location on this river. The Ilkin tugged at her. She planted her heels onto the wooden slats. Little good it would do. It let out a low laugh and brought its mouth to her ear. "Your blood smells clean." She recoiled, but it gripped her hard, its grayish tongue tickling the side of her neck. Thrashing, she could still do nothing as it twisted them into the hall and toward the two waiting Ilkin in it. To the back door, not 10 feet away, already open to the night beyond. "You see what I shielded you from at Morath, Alid?" Vernon crooned, falling into step behind them. She slammed her feet into the wooden floor, over and over, straining for the wall, for anything to have leverage to push and fight against it. No. Lorcan had left. He'd gotten everything he needed from her and left. She'd slowed him down, had brought enemy after him. "And whatever will you do back at Morath?" Vernon mused, "now that Manon Blackbeak is dead." Alid's chest cracked open at the words. Manon, gutted by her own grandmother and thrown off the side of the keep for her disobedience. Of course, I'll shield you from your relatives, but Erwin will be interested to learn what you've been up to, what you took from Caltaine. The stone in her jacket's breast pocket. It thrummed and whispered, awakening as she bucked. No one in the now silent inn at the opposite end of the hall bothered to come around the corner and investigate her wordless shouting. Another Ilkin stepped into view just beyond the open back door. 4 of them, and Lorcan had left. The stone in her breast began to seethe, but a voice that was young and old, wise and sweet, whispered, "Do not touch it. Do not use it. Do not acknowledge it." It had been inside Caltaine, had driven her mad, had made her into that shell, a shell for something else to fill. The open door loomed. Think, think, think. She couldn't breathe enough to think. The Ilken reeked around her, promising the sort of horror she'd endure when they got her back to Morath. No, she wouldn't go. She wouldn't let them take her, break and use her. One shot. She'd have one shot. No, whispered the voice in her head. No. But there was a knife at her uncle's side as he strolled ahead and out the door. It was all she'd need. She'd seen Lorcan do it enough while hunting. Vernon paused in the back courtyard, a large, rectangular iron box waiting before him. There was a small window in it, and handles on two of its edges. She knew what the Ilken were for as the three others fell into place around it. Oh, were four, sorry. They'd shove her inside, lock the door, and fly her back to Morath. The box was little bigger than a coffin standing upright. Its door was already open. The Ilken would have to release her to throw her inside. For a heartbeat, they'd let go. They'd have to use it to her, or she'd have to use it to her advantage. Y'all, I'm so nervous, I'm sorry. Vernon loitered beside the box. She didn't dare look at his knife. A sob broke from her throat. She'd die here, in this filthy courtyard, with these awful things around her. She'd never see the sun again, or laugh, or hear music. The Ilken stirred around the box, wings rustling. 5 feet. 4. 3. No, 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 the wise voice begged her. She would not be taken back to Morath. She would not let them touch her and corrupt her. The Ilken shoved her forward, a violent thrust meant to send her staggering into the box. Ali twisted, slamming face first into the edge instead, her nose crunching, but she whirled on her uncle. Her ankle roared as she set her weight on it to lunge for the knife at his side. Vernon didn't have time to realize what she intended, as she whipped the knife free from its sheath at his hip. As she flipped the knife in her fingers, her other hand wrapping around the hilt, as her shoulders curved inward, her chest caving, and she drove the blade home. What? 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 She killed him? Lorcan had the kill shot. Hidden in the fog, the four Ilken couldn't detect him, as the man was certain was Elid's uncle, had that Ilken haul her toward that prison box. It was on him that Lorcan had trained his hatchet. Elid was sobbing in terror and despair. Each sound whetted his rage into something so lethal Lorcan could barely see. She could barely see straight, sorry. Then the Ilken threw her into that iron box, and Elid proved she wasn't bluffing in her claim to never return to Morath. He heard her nose break as she hit the rim of the box, heard her uncle's cry of surprise as she rebounded and lunged for him, and grabbed the dagger. Not to kill him. Huh? Not to kill him? You're joking. You're joking. No. No. No, 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 no. For the first time in 5 centuries, Lorcan knew true fear as Elid turned that knife on herself, the blade angled to plunge up and into her heart. He threw his hatchet. As the tip of that dagger pierced the leather over her ribs, the wooden handle of his hatchet slammed into her wrist. Elid went down with a cry, the dagger flying wide. Lorcan knew true fear. Lorcan was already moving as they whirled toward where he'd perched on the rooftop. He leapt to the nearest one, to the weapons he'd positioned there minutes before, knowing they'd emerge from this door. His next knife went through the wing of an Ilken, then another to keep it down before they pinpointed his location. But Lorcan was already sprinting to the 3rd rooftop, flanking the courtyard. To the sword he'd left there, he hurled it right through the face of the closest one. 2 left, along with Vernon, screaming now to get the girl in the box. Elid was running like hell for the narrow alley out of the courtyard, not the broad street. The alley, too small for the Ilken to fit, especially with all the debris and trash littered throughout. Good girl. Lorcan leapt and rolled onto the next roof to the 2 remaining daggers. He threw them, but the Ilkin had already learned his aim, his throwing style. They hadn't learned Aleid's. She hadn't just gone into the alley to save herself. She'd gone after the hatchet, and Lorcan watched as that woman crept up behind the distracted Ilkin and drove the hatchet into its wings. With an injured wrist, with her nose leaking blood down her face, the Ilkin screamed, thrashing to grab her, even as it crashed to its knees, where she wanted it. The axe was swinging again before its scream finished sounding. The sound was cut off a heartbeat later as its head bounced to the stones. Lorcan hurtled off the roof, aiming for the 1 remaining Ilkin now seething at her. But it pivoted and ran to where Vernon was cowering by the door, his face bloodless. Sobbing, her own blood sprayed on the stones, Aleid whirled toward her uncle, too, axe already lifting. But the Ilkin reached her uncle, snatched him up in its strong arms, and launched them both into the sky. Aleid threw the hatchet anyway. It missed the Ilkin's wing by a whisper of wind. The axe slammed to the cobblestones, taking out a chunk of rock, right near the Ilkin with the shredded wings, now crawling toward the courtyard exit. Lorcan watched as Aleid picked up his axe and walked toward the hissing, broken beast. It lashed at her with its claws. Aleid easily sidestepped the swipe. It screamed as she stomped on its wrecked wing, halting its crawl to freedom. When it fell silent, she said in a quiet, merciless voice he'd never heard her use, clear despite the blood clogging one nostril. I want Erwin to know that the next time he sends you after me like a pack of dogs, I'll return the favor. I want Erwin to know that the next time I see him, I will carve Manon's name on his goddamned heart. Tears rolled down her face, silent and unending as the wrath that now sculpted her features into a thing of mighty and terrible beauty. But it seems like tonight isn't really your night, Aleid said to the Ilkin, lifting the hatchet again over her shoulder. The Ilkin might have been whimpering as she smiled grimly. Because it takes only 1 to deliver a message, and your companions are already on their way. The axe fell. Flesh and bone and blood spilled onto the stones. She stood there, staring at the corpse, at the reeking blood that dribbled from its neck. Lorcan, perhaps a bit numbly, walked over and took the axe from her hands. How she'd been able to use it with the sore wrist. She hissed and whimpered at the movement, as if whatever force had rushed through her blood had vanished, leaving only pain behind. She clutched her wrist, utterly silent as he circled the dead Ilkin and severed their heads from their bodies, one after one, retrieving his weapons as he went. People inside the inn were stirring, wondering at the noise, wondering if it was safe to come out to see what had happened to the girl they'd so willingly betrayed. For a heartbeat, Lorcan debated ending that innkeeper. But Aleid said, "Enough death." Tears streaked through the splattered black blood on her cheeks, blood that was a mockery of the smattering of her freckles. Blood, crimson and pure, ran from her nose down her mouth and chin, already caking. So he sheathed the hatchet and scooped her into his arms. There's so many tappable moments in this chapter, but I didn't want to stop reading. She didn't object. He carried her through the fog-wrapped town to where their boat was tied. Already onlookers had gathered, no doubt to scavenge their supplies when the Ilkin left. A snarl from Lorcan had them skittering into the mist. As he stepped onto the barge, the boat rocking beneath him, Aleid said, "He told me you'd left." Lorcan still didn't set her down, holding her aloft with one arm as he untied the ropes. "You believed him?" She wiped at the blood on her face, then winced at the tender wrist and broken nose. He'd have to tend to that. Even then, it might very well be slightly crooked forever. He doubted she'd care. Knew she'd perhaps see that crooked nose as a sign that she'd fought and survived. Lorcan put her down at last, atop the crate of apples, right where he could see her. She sat silently as he took up the pole and pushed them away from the dock, from that hateful town, glad for the cover of mist as they drifted downstream. They could perhaps afford 2 more days on the river before they'd have to cut inland to shake any enemies trailing them. Good thing they were close enough to Ilwi now to make it in a matter of days on foot. Oh shit. Shit's about to go down. When there was nothing but wafting mist and the lapping of the river against the boat, Lorcan spoke again. You wouldn't have stopped that dagger." She didn't respond, and the silence went on long enough that he turned to where she perched on the crate. Tears rolled down her face as she stared at the water. He didn't know how to comfort, how to soothe, not in the way she needed. So he set down the pole and sat beside her on the crate. The wood groaning. I'm about to start crying. Because guess who also started their cycle today? Not just a lead, but me. The wood groaning. Who's Manon? He'd heard most of what Vernon had hissed inside that private dining room while he'd been setting his trap in the courtyard, but some details had evaded him. "The wing leader of the Iron Teeth Legion," Elite said, voice trembling, the words snagging on the blood clogging her nose. Lorcan took a shot in the dark. "She was the one who got you out that day. She was why you're in witch leathers, why you wound up wandering in Oakwald." A nod. "And Kaltain, who was she? The person who'd given her that thing she carried." "Erwin's mistress, his slave. She was my age. He put the stone inside her arm and made her into a living ghost. She bought me and Man in time to run. She incinerated most of Morath in the process, and herself." Elide reached into her jacket, her breathing thick with tears still sliding down her face. Lorcan's breath caught as she pulled out a scrap of dark fabric. The scent clinging to it was female, foreign, broken and sad and cold, but there was another scent beneath it, one he knew and hated. "Kaltain said to give this to Selena, not to Aelin," Elide said, shaking with her tears. "Because Selena, she gave her a warm cloak in a cold dungeon, and they wouldn't let Kaltain take the cloak with her when they brought her to Morath, but she managed to save this scrap. To repay Selena for that kindness. But what sort of gift is this thing? What is this?" She pulled back the fold of cloth, revealing a dark sliver of stone. Every drop. Stop. Fuck! Every drop of blood in his body went cold and hot, awake and dead. What the fuck is it? What the fuck is it? She was sobbing quietly. Why is this payment? My very bones say not to touch it. A voice told me not to even think about it. It was wrong. The thing in her beautiful, filthy hand was wrong. It did not belong here, should not be here. The god who had watched over him his whole life had recoiled. Even death feared it. "Put it away," he said roughly. "Right now." Hand shaking, she did so. Only when it was hidden inside her jacket did he say, "Let's clean you up first. It's at that nose and wrist. I'll tell you what I know while I do." She nodded, gaze on the river. Lorcan reached out, grasping her chin and forcing her to look at him. My heart. Hopeless, bleak eyes met his. He brushed away a stray tear. I am folding like a lawn chair right now. Oh my god. Y'all. Hold on. There. Hold on. There. Y'all. I'm about to throw up. Lorcan reached out, grasping her chin and forcing her to look at him. Hopeless, bleak eyes met his. He brushed away a stray tear with his thumb. I made a promise to protect you. I will not break it, Elide. She made to pull away, but he gripped her. I can't. I'm tabbing this whole fucking chapter. This whole chapter is getting tabbed. I'm highlighting every single word. Oh my god. Oh my god. You know what? I I have a new number one. one, y'all. I have a new number one. I'm so sorry to Dorian, but we are getting a divorce effective immediately. Our marriage is annulled. It's gone. There's a new man in my life, and it is Lorcan. Oh my God. Oh my God. She made to pull away, but he gripped her a little harder, keeping her eyes on him. I will... Oh my God. I can't. Ah! I will always find you, he swore to her. Her throat bobbed. Lorcan whispered, I promise. Y'all, I can't. I can't. Oh my God. Oh my God. It's not an unpopular opinion. It is the right opinion. The only opinion. Oh my God. Do y'all ever read something like just, it makes you feel so much and you just want to like rip the book? You want to like tear this book apart? That's how I'm fighting the urge to just like rip out the pages. Oh my God. Oh my God. That man can't die. That man cannot die. And you know what? Why the fuck is the sun doing this right now? You know what? I can't ever find out that Maeve, Lorcan, and Alid are in the same room. Baby, let me tell you, that can never happen. That can never happen. That can never happen. Maeve can never find out about this. Oh, sweet Lord. Oh my God. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm gonna pause real quick so that I can tab that because, oh my God. I don't even know what color to tab it. Red? It did make me feel things. What did I use blue for? Maybe yellow? I know I'm gonna highlight it purple because I use purple to highlight the things that they say, like confessions and stuff like that. I'm definitely gonna highlight it purple, but I don't know what color tab to use. I've been using blue as a substitute for purple because I don't really tab sad parts because I don't like to reread sad parts. Anyway, sorry, I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna shut up and I'm gonna just do my thing real quick. So talk amongst yourselves while oh, I do have pink. You're right. I do have pink. Hold on. I have to find it. It's a very light pink too, so I could do pink. It's like a baby pink. I think I have a little darker. Oh, I also have this like rosy pink. But I've been using this as red. It's like this rosy pink. Which one? Should I do the dark pink or the lighter pink? Maybe the dark pink for like smutty. Why is the sun literally eating me up right now? Light pink. Okie dokie. Sarah, I trust you with my life, so we're gonna do light pink. Oh my God! Even just reading it back. God. I made a promise to protect you. I will not break it, Alid. I'm gonna underline, he gripped her a little harder, keeping her eyes on him, because that did, oh wait, hold on. There's so much I wanna, hold on. Let's just highlight the dialogue first. I will always find you. I promise. I'm gonna throw up. I love this man so much. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Lorcan reached out, grasping her chin and forcing her to look at him. She made to pull away, but he gripped her a little harder, keeping her eyes on him. Yeah. 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 Okay, there we go. I found a good spot. The sun is like eating my ass up right now. And let's tab it red for now, since we did pink. I'm gonna have to redo the way I tab things now. I left bite marks in this hoe. I don't know if y'all can see them. I left bite marks in that hoe. Feeling like I'm in Verity now. Okay. We're not even done with this fucking chapter, y'all. God. That was the best. That was it right there. That was it right there. Anyway. I did finish Verity, yeah. I'm sated. For the rest of the book, they can throw anything at me that has to do with literally any other characters but Elide and Lorcan, and I will be fine with what I just read. I'm alright. I'm set for life. Elide sifted through all Lorcan had told her while he cleaned her face, inspected her nose and wrist, bound the latter in soft cloth, and quickly, but not viciously, set her nose. Word keys, word gates. Aelin had one word key, was looking for the other two, soon to be only one more, once Elide gave her the key she carried. 2 keys against 1. Perhaps they would win this war, even if Elide didn't know how Aelin could use them and not destroy herself, but she'd leave it up to her. Erwin might have the armies, but if Aelin had 2 keys, she tried not to think about Manon. Vernon had lied about Lorcan leaving, to break her spirit, to get her to come willingly. Perhaps Manon was not dead either. She wouldn't believe it until she had proof, until the whole world screamed at her that the wing leader was gone. Lorcan was back at the prow by the time she'd changed into one of his own shirts while her leathers dried. Her wrist throbbed, a dull, incessant ache. Her face was no better, and Lorcan had promised she'd likely have a black eye from it, but her head was clear. She came up beside him, watching him push the pole against the mucky bottom of the river. I killed those things. You did a fine job of it, he said. I don't regret it. Dark, depthless eyes lit to hers. Good. She didn't know why she said it, why she felt a need, or like it was worthy, like it was worth anything to him at all. But Elide stood on her toes, and I thought we were done with it. Like, I'm not used to being happy in these books, and I'm very happy right now. So I'm like, stood on her toes, kissed his stubble-rough cheek, and said, I will always find you too, Lorcan. She felt him staring at her, even when she'd climbed into bed minutes later. When she awoke, clean strips of linen for her cycle were next to the bed. When is it my turn to be happy? His own shirt, washed and dried overnight, now cut up for her to use as she would. I wanna hit something. I wanna hit something. You see this? You see this right here? All this empty space? I'm about to use this to write my fucking confession of undying love that I have for Lorcan now. Anyway, let me highlight this. And the lines are not straight. But do I care? No, I don't. I don't care. Anyways, chapter 51, because we're still not done. Even though I'm set for life. I am set for life. With the content I just received, I'm set for life. I swear to God, if something happens to them, yo, please don't tell me something happens to them, because I don't think I could handle it. Realistically speaking, I don't think I would be okay at all if something happened to them. And I'm not gonna read the comments because I don't want to know. Chapter 51. Back to hell. Back to the trenches we go. EoS coast was burning. For 3 days they sailed past village after village, some still burning, some only cinders, and each of them, Aelin and Rowan, had labored to put out those flames. Rowan, in his hawk form, could fly in, but it killed her. Absolutely killed her, that they could not afford to halt long enough to go to shore. So she did it from the ship, burrowing deep into her power, stretching it as far as it could go across sea and sky and sand to wink out those fires one by one. By the end of the 3rd day, she was flagging, so thirsty that no amount of water was able to slake it, her lips chapped and peeling. Girl, that's what mine are right now, because let me tell you, we have a cold front coming in, and my body is feeling it. Like, my knees are achy, my lips are starting to get chapped, but I'm ready for it. Rowan had gone to shore 3 times now to ask who had done it. Each time the answer was the same. Darkness had swept over them in the night, the kind that blotted out the stars, and then the villages were burning beneath flaming arrows not spotted until they had found their targets. But where that darkness, where Erwin's forces were, there was no sign of them. No sign of Maeve either. Rowan and Lysandra had flown high and wide, searching for either force, but nothing. Ghosts, some villagers were now claiming, had attacked them. The ghosts of their unburied dead, raging home from distant lands, until they started whispering another rumor, that Aelin Galathinius herself was burning EoS. That's what I thought was going to happen. Village by village, for vengeance that they had not aided her kingdom 10 years ago, no matter that she was putting out the flames. They did not believe Rowan when he tried to explain who soothed their fires from aboard the distant ship. He told her not to listen, not to let it sink in, so she tried. And it had been during one of those times that Rowan had run his thumb over the scar on her palm, leaning to kiss her neck. He'd breathed her in, and she knew he detected an answer to the question that had caused him to flee that morning on the ship. No, she was not carrying his child. They had only discussed the matter once, last week, when she'd crawled off him, panting and coated in sweat, and he'd asked if she was taking a tonic. She'd merely told him no. He'd gone still. And then she had explained that if she'd inherited so much of Mab's Fae blood, she might very well have inherited the Fae's struggle to conceive. And even if the timing was horrible, if this was to be the one shot she had of providing Terrason a bloodline, a future, she would not waste it. His green eyes turned distant, but he'd nodded, kissing her shoulder, and that had been that. She hadn't mustered the nerve to ask if he wanted to sire her children, if he wanted to have children, given what had happened to Lyria. And during that brief moment before he'd flown back to shore to put out more flames, she hadn't possessed the nerve to explain why she'd hurled her guts up that morning either. The past 3 days had been a blur. From the moment Fenris had uttered those words, "Nameless is my price," everything had been a blur of smoke and flame and waves and sun. But as the sun set on the 3rd day, before the sun set, no, never mind. Aelin again shoved those thoughts away as the escort ship began signaling ahead, the crew frantically working to drop anchor. Sweat beaded on her brow, her tongue parchment dry, but she forgot her thirst, her exhaustion, as she beheld what Rolf's men had spied moments ago. A flat, waterlogged land under a cloud sky spread inland as far as the eye could see. Moldy green and bone-white grasses crusted the bumps and hollows, little islands of life among the mirror-smooth grey water between them, and among them all, jutting up from brackish water and humped land like the... I'm about to throw up. Sorry. Too much saliva built up. Little islands of life among the mirror-smooth grey water between them, and among them all, jutting up from brackish water and humped land like the limbs of an ill-buried corpse. Ruins. Great, crumbling ruins. A once lovely city drowned on the plain. The stone marshes. Manon let the humans and Fae meet with the captains of the other two ships. She heard the news soon enough, but they saw it lay about a day and a half inland, precisely where they didn't know, or how long it'd take to find its exact location. Until they returned, the ships would remain anchored here, and Manon, it seemed, would join them on their trip inland, as if the Queen suspected that if... Why am I losing my voice? That if she were left behind, their little fleet would not be intact when they returned. Clever woman. But that was the other problem, the one facing Manon right now, already looking anxious and put out. Abraxas's tail lashed a bit, the iron spikes scraping and scratching the pristine ship deck, as if he'd heard the Queen's order a minute ago. The Wyvern has to go. On the flat, open expanse of the marshes, he'd be too noticeable. Manon placed a hand on his scarred snout, meeting those depthless black eyes. You need to lie low somewhere. A warm, sorrowful huff into her palm. Don't whine about it, Manon said, even as something twisted and roiled in her belly. Stay out of sight, keep alert, and come back in 4 days' time. She allowed herself to lean forward, resting her brow against his snout. His growl rumbled her bones. We've been a pair, you and I. A few days is nothing, my friend. He nudged her head with his own. Manon swallowed hard. You saved my life, many times. I never thanked you for it. Abraxas let out a low whine. You and me, she promised him, from now until the darkness claims us. She made herself pull away, made herself stroke his snout just once more, then back to step, then another. Go. He didn't move. She bared her iron teeth. Go. Abraxas gave her a look full of reproach, but his body tensed, wings lifting, and Manon decided she had never hated anyone more than she hated the Queen of Terrasen and her friends, for making him leave, for causing this parting, when so many dangers had not been able to cleave them. But Abraxas was airborne, the sails groaning in the wind of his wings, and Manon watched until he was a speck in the horizon, until the longboats were being readied to bring them to the high grasses and stagnant gray water of the marshes beyond. The Queen and her court readied, donning weapons like some people adorn themselves with jewelry, moving about in question and answer to one another. So similar to her 13, similar enough that she had to turn away, ducking into the shadows of the foremast and schooling her breathing into an even rhythm. Her hands trembled. Astrid was not dead. The 13 were not dead. She'd kept the thoughts about it at bay, but now, with that flower-smelling wyvern vanishing over the horizon, the last piece of the wing leader had vanished with him. A muggy wind tugged her inland, toward those marshes, dragging her red cape with it. Manon ran a finger down the crimson cloak she'd made herself wear this morning. Rhiannon. I'm gonna get that name. I'm gonna figure it out and I'm gonna get it right. She'd never heard a whisper that the Crochan royal bloodline had walked off that final killing field 5 centuries ago. She wondered if any of the Crochans beyond her half-sister knew the child of Lothian, Blackbeak, and a Crochan prince had survived. Manon unfastened the brooch clasping the cloak at her shoulders. She weighed the thick bolt of red fabric in her hands. A few easy swipes of her nails had her clutching a long, thin strip of the cloak. A few more motions had her tying it around the end of her braid, the red stark against the moon white of her hair. Rhiannon? Okay. Rhiannon? Rhiannon? Okay. Thank you! Manon stepped out of the shadows behind the foremast and peered over the edge of the ship. No one commented when she dumped her half-sister's cloak into the sea. The wind carried it a few feet over the waves before it fluttered, like a dying leaf, to land atop the swells. A pool of blood. That's how it looked from the distance as the tide carried it out into the ocean. She found the King of Ardalan and Queen of Terrasen waiting at the railing of the main deck. Okay. Tell me why my heart dropped whenever I read the King of Ardland, because I forgot that that man is dead and Dorian is the king now. Waiting at the railing of the main deck, their companions climbing into the awaiting longboat bobbing on the waves, she met eyes of sapphire, then those of turquoise and gold. She knew they'd seen it, perhaps not understood what the cloak had meant, but understood the gesture for what it was. Manon flicked her iron teeth and nails back into their slits as she approached them. Aelin Galathinius said quietly, "You never stop seeing their faces." It was only when they were rowing for the shore, spindrift soaking them, that Manon realized the Queen hadn't meant the 13, and Manon wondered if Aelin, too, had watched that cloak floating out to sea and thought it looked like spilled blood. The end. I think I might stop there, like, forever, and just not continue. I think I can live with where I am right now, because Lorcan and Elite are happy. The others are alive. They're not happy, but they're alive, and that's good enough for me. I'm so stressed out by this series, it's not even funny. I'm so stressed out by this series, it's not even funny. You know, thinking of something happening to any of these characters is gonna make me physically sick, and I know at least 25, that's being too generous, at least 50% of them are gonna die. It hasn't been spoiled for you, right? Nothing, I know nothing. I know absolutely nothing that comes next. I don't know what happens at the end of this book. I don't know what happens in Kingdom of Ash. I don't know what happens to Lorcan and Elide. I know nothing. Yeah, I know absolutely nothing. Y'all, please don't hate me for this. I'm obviously not gonna do it. But part of me really wants to look up what happens with Lorcan and Elide just so I can prepare myself, because the way I feel about them, the way I feel about Lorcan, I know if something happens to either of them, I will not be okay. It's gonna be a Sam all over again, because Sam's always gonna be my number one. Rest in peace, my boy. Love you. Love you. He's always gonna be my number one. But like, Lorcan is a close second right now. I won't. I promise I won't. I said I wasn't. I'm not going to. But like, the temptation is definitely there. The temptation is there. Yeah. It's bad right now. It's not looking very good for me right now. Oh, God. Anyway, it was I had fun today. It was a very fun few chapters that we read, and so I'm very happy that I got my break. But I feel like eventually it's gonna get to the point where like Lorcan and Elide are not breaks anymore. And it's just gonna be pain all around. The first in this series. I had fun today. I had so much fun today. Yeah. I did. I had a feel good one today. I got a tab out of it. Where is it? Oh, it's right. She's right there. I had fun today. It's Tower of Dawn next. Okay. I might do lives like Monday, Wednesdays, not Fridays. Did y'all see that? There's someone in this car with me. They've been bugging me this whole live. Anyway, the next live, well, I'm not gonna do one tomorrow because I have an essay due that I need to type up. So it won't be tomorrow. I'm gonna say Wednesday. 38 through 40. Oh, perfect. I'm like halfway through 37 right now. So I'll be done by the time that I need to be done on Wednesday. I am reading Tower of Dawn. I would not say enjoying it. I don't hate it. But I would definitely, when I'm reading it, I would rather be reading this. I like the characters. Still don't remember all their names. Sartak, love him. Okay, also, I want to talk about Elide and not a lead. God, she lives in my mind rent free. I want to talk about Nesrin and Kale, because I was kind of upset that they like went their separate ways and like are like not like gonna be together romantically, because like I thought that the way that their relationship was built up in Queen of Shadows, that was gonna be like a for sure like end game type of relationship. But I will say that now, after I've been reading her relationship with Sartak, I do see why they did what they did. Yeah, because I love Sartak, and I like Irene and Kale's dynamic of like, she started off hating him because he, you know, was from Ardalan and he was a soldier from Ardalan and she hated him, and now she's like over here feeling guilty because she doesn't want she doesn't want Nesrin to come back from her little hunt with Sartak. So I do like where it's going now. I love Irene. I love her. I loved her in the Assassin's Blade, so I already went in with like this bias of like, I'm gonna love her, and I was not disappointed because I love her. And I can't wait, because obviously I feel like she comes back to fight with Kale, or not to fight with him, but like to help, because she's a healer, so I feel like she comes back to help. So yeah, love them. It's just getting to know their world is taking me out of it a bit, because I already know them and I'm already so familiar with their stories that it's like learning this whole other group's stories and like how they are and who they are. It's kind of just like putting me off a little, but I am enjoying it. Yeah. Oh, God. Today was fun, and that's what I'm going to focus on. I'm not going to be a pessimist and focus on the fact that everyone that I love is probably going to fucking die. So Elid's not thinking about it. Lorcan's not thinking about it. So I'm not going to think about it. So yeah, I'll see you guys on Wednesday. I'll schedule it right now, and I will see y'all on Wednesday. That is true. Tower of Dawn is not stressing me out at all. But yeah. Okay. I'll see y'all on Wednesday. Bye.